they're showing not just that bilingualism is, has beneficial effects in sort of essentially the executive functioning aspects of cognitive development, but also seems to result in the delay in the onset of dementia by about 4 years, which is a really great thing for those of us who can remember. But but the last thing you may remember as a bilingual is, it might have happened 4 years earlier. So in any event, there is this evidence for the growth of benefits of bilingualism. And what I would like to do is to try to give you a slight demonstration of, I don't know if this will work, but I enjoy doing this just in front of you. I told you, this is the equivalent of my PowerPoint for today. And I'm going to ask you to do a little experiment, which is I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. You're not closed now, but I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. I'm going to take this set of keys and I'm going to throw it somewhere in the group. Right? And when you hear the noise, I'd like you to just point to where you think you heard the noise coming from. And I'm taking a risk because these are the keys to my car. So I don't want to lose the keys. Because I won't be able to get home from the airport tonight. But I'm going to, so when I say 3, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. And then I'm going to throw the keys, and I'd like you to just, with your eyes closed, point to where you hear the noise coming from. Right, so close your eyes at 3. 1, 2, 3. Right, nobody looking. Okay, now you can open your eyes. Right, you heard the noise coming over here. And I hope I can find the keys. Here they are. So you're all very good. And this is where my training as an experimental psychologist comes in. And those of you who've taken courses in perception and in psychophysics know that the reason why you were able to locate that sound was the difference in timing for the arrival of the sound to your 2 ears. Right? And that very tiny difference, you're able to make sense of that difference and interpret it and make sense of it and make meaning of it. I mean, this is just a very simple demonstration. And bats, by the way, are very good at this. Right? Bats will have this thing called echolocation. They'll send out these high frequency sounds, and they will. Then the sound returns, and they have 2 ears, and they kind of use that information to catch mosquitoes and things flying around. But our ability to make sense out of these meaningfully discrepant information is a fundamental human ability. It's really, building on something as simple as that. Right? You kind of start making sense of the world around you. And psycholinguistics is really the study of that sort of thing. Right? You have things like ambiguous sentences. People love to talk about, you can hear the same sentence. So these are Chomsky type sentences. Right? Flying airplanes can be dangerous. That is a sentence that has 2 different meanings. Right? You kind of appreciate the discrepancy between them. Another favorite ambiguous sentence I like is, the students are revolting. No offense to students here, but but our ability to make sense of that is really an example of active cognition. And as early as the 60s, when people like Jerome Bruner, George Miller, these old history of psychology were talking about cognition. Ulrich Neisser wrote a book called Cognitive Psychology in the early 1970s, published in the late 60s, in which he talked about sort of cognition being a process of analysis by synthesis. That you don't have these passive receptors for information, but you really are actively hypothesizing the nature of information. And this all preceded people thinking of information as being social in nature. Sort of Vygotskian overlay to this, but even before that, when people think of people as machines, there's still this sort of active interpretation of information. There's an old theory of speech perception called the motor theory of speech perception, and this was that basically we have these articulatory mechanisms for speaking, but that the way in which we hear and perceive speech is by reversing that process. So you actually activate your production mechanisms for speech, and that's how you understand it. So, so perception itself isn't just a passive receiving of information; it's the actual production, engaging in the production. And that kind of theory became, got carried to extreme. They did these experiments where, they would anesthetize your larynx and then talk to you and see if you understood what they were saying. And that's sort of reductio ad absurdum of the theory. And people do understand, by the way, larynxes are anesthetized. But the idea that there's sort of a mirror process in perception became, it came back. And just a few years ago, there was this discovery of this thing called mirror neurons. And you've probably read about this in papers. The idea that there are really these neurons that sort of mimic each other. And so all of these are really sort of fundamental to human cognition. And the conjecture right now is that these are the exact mechanisms by which bilinguals end up having a different kind of and more, in some ways, more advanced form of cognition, because you're always engaged in sort of mirroring, in sort of looking at and interpreting discrepancies, however slight they might be, even something as basic as vocabulary being in two different languages. They really mean sort of the same thing, but they're just different enough so that you get a different perspective on cognition. And so that's really the theoretical base on which we can say, well, there's something really different and advantageous about bilingualism. We just don't recognize that in society. But the more sort of science advances in our understanding of language, and in ways that people sort of somehow can understand from the gut level, I think it's going to be good. And ultimately, I think society is skeptical of behavioral evidence. That sort of I think ultimately brain scans and sort of the neuroscience underlying this is really going to be where people will start believing, oh yeah, these brains look different. Okay, these dementia's almost getting there. The people can relate to that. But those might be sort of some of the theoretical bases on which we could start taking positive steps towards bilingualism. So that's, and it's great that there's some research on it, and this was when I took my first job as a developmental psychologist at Yale. And this was in 1979. I had a grad student, Rafael Diaz, who just retired from San Francisco State. You know that when your graduate students start retiring, things are happening. But he and I did some work that was funded by, I see Ronaldo Macias back there, by NIE, National Institute of Education, in which we looked at the positive effects of bilingualism. What we did was we borrowed from the Canadian research, which had come out of Wally Lambert's shop. It was Peel and Lambert, 1962. They had a paper on the relationship between bilingualism and intelligence, in which they showed that balanced bilinguals had cognitive flexibility over monolinguals. And we wanted to kind of replicate that with our local bilingual population, which were Puerto Rican children in the New Haven public schools. We got funding from NIE to do that line of work, and we actually did find positive effects, and especially in areas of metalinguistic awareness, that kids who are more bilingual tended to have more awareness about their language, etc., than monolingual kids. We looked at things like translation skills in bilingual kids. It was great, a lot of fun to do that kind of work. And here's the somewhat depressing part of the story, which is, I guess the party was just ending as we got to it, because we got about 2-3 years of funding to do this. And the federal government was just in the process of shifting its funding priorities. This was the late 1970s, early 80s. There was a pot of money that was known as the Part C funds. Part C funds were Part C of Title VII of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was also known as the Bilingual Education Act. And Part A gave programs to school districts, Part B gave money for professional development programs, and Part C funded research on bilingualism. And this was actually one of the rare moments in U.S. history where the word bilingual appears on federal legislation. The Part C of this fund, of this act, gave research, and that fund was not intended just for use by OBEMLA, the Office of Bilingual Education and Minority Languages Affairs, which was the office that received funding, but they were expected to coordinate it with the other parts of the department that were doing work, and this included NIE, National Institute of Education, which was really, the linchpin of the learning sciences of those days. But it had political problems, and it was sort of suffering from political credibility issues. SCES, the Education Statistics Agency, but also the OPBE, which is Office of Planning, Budget, and Evaluation. And OPBE is responsible for program evaluation. And so the bilingual programs that are funded as programs out of the Department of Education and so forth. And all of them have sort of a stake in this. So you can imagine a committee. Rinaldo, can I ask you, were you part of that committee? Did you sit around that, the Part C committee? You were in the government at that time, right? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So any horrible things that I might tell you about, blame him. It's all his fault. Right. He was my good guy. He was my banker. Yeah. But his money was taken away. What happened was that OPBE, the evaluation people, basically corralled all that money and put it towards the study of the efficacy of bilingual education. That's essentially what happened in the early 80s. And the history there was that you had the Bilingual Education Act that promoted almost all their money to bilingual education, to the extent that English-only programs were considered a special case. They were called SAPes, Special Alternative Instructional Programs. And there was a cap on the percentage. It was at 1.8%. It was very small, relatively speaking, and everything else was bilingual. And so there's a lot of question about, should we be promoting bilingual? The Lau remedies also suggested that bilingual was a better way to go. And and there was also a study, what's known as the AIR study of 1978. It was a federally mandated, congressionally mandated study to look at bilingual programs versus English-only programs. And that study had shown that bilingual education, kids in bilingual programs were no more successful in English achievement, literacy outcomes in math as well, than kids who were in English-only programs. That study had a lot of design flaws, including the fact that former kids who had been in bilingual programs who were now in English-only programs were counted as being in English-only programs and so forth. But that study was sort of sitting out there ambiguously. And early in the Reagan administration, there were questions about that policy. And the evaluation shop decided to take all the money and put it towards two large studies that evaluated whether bilingual was superior to English only. One was known as the immersion study, which David Ramirez, who's now at Cal State Long Beach, or might have just retired also.
He's consulting.
Anyway, he was the PI for, and then there was a study funded, or known as a Development Associate Study, which was another large nationally representative study. And these were basically horse race studies between essentially transitional bilingual programs and English-only programs. And they really were intended to address the bilingual question. And basically they didn't show any, they were terribly motivated studies. They were done by federal RFP to contractors who basically implemented them. I shouldn't say such bad things about David because he's a really good guy and a good friend of mine. But essentially he was implementing a design that was mandated by the federal government, and the National Academy of Sciences Committee looked at these studies and concluded that they were barely worth the paper they were written on, essentially. But they did try to address one of two defining issues in bilingual education at that time. One is, does language of instruction matter or not? The second question that people kept asking was, how long does it take kids to learn English? Right? Because and that's really a question you would only ask in a remedial framework. If the kids lack proficiency and what you're doing is compensating for that deficit, then okay, we're willing to pay for it, but for how long? Right? That's really the motivation behind it. But the question of how long it takes kids comes up not just in federal legislation such as the ESEA that try to put caps on the length of time services can be provided, etc. But also in other legislation such as Prop 227, which has been talked about already today. The term English immersion programs not ordinarily to exceed 1 year is an expectation about a 1 year time frame and so forth. And sad to say, these are the two, language of instruction and time to develop English proficiency, were really the two defining questions. And I think there are actually answers to these. And that's fine. It's good to have these answers. Claude Goldberg is probably the most ardent vocal person saying, darn it, if we compare these two types of programs, bilingual comes out superior over and over again. We look at meta-analyses of these studies, and especially the best designed studies show that even if the outcome is English, let alone the native language, bilingual programs show superior outcomes by an effect size that exceeds that of class size reduction studies. So, and that we can almost say conclusively that is the case. Slavin has a study recently that might suggest that that's not the case, that it's more or less program quality that matters. But in any event, I think that we're close to answering that question. The problem is that question is really answering a political question, and therefore no matter how strong the evidence may be, ultimately the decision in whether you mount the bilingual program or not is a political one, not one that's based on research. The one on how long it takes kids, Senator Pell of Pell Grants, and therefore a very, very good person, didn't like bilingual programs. I remember being asked by him, testifying in front of his committee in the 80s. He asked me how long I thought that took kids to learn English, and I gave my standard 4 to 7 years. And he said, "I disagree, Professor. It should be 6 months." And so he wanted that time frame really short. But I think 4 to 7 years, no matter how you look at it, and we've gotten better with it. One of the nice things about No Child Left Behind is that it generated a lot of data on student achievement. If you look at things like proficiency, English language proficiency scores, 4 to 7 is still what you come up with. So we have answers to that. But what unfortunately, they even created an opportunity gap, and the opportunity gap is we're not able to ask the kind of question that we really like to do, which is to say, what are the conditions by which we can promote bilingual development in children? Okay, what are the ways in which we can improve the programs? We have a hard time putting it within the framework of Castañeda, the Castañeda standards, right, which is used for, and this is a useful case, and the last that Patricia checked, it still has some teeth. We'll see, right? Anyway, as of today, it still has teeth. That a program of instruction for English language learners should be based on the 3 principles, the 3 standards. One is it should be based on sound theory. 2, it should be implemented with adequate resources. And prong 3, after a period of time, it should be able to show results. And the 4th prong, which is that if not, you go back and revisit the implementation or revise the theory. And that 4th prong really, which is in a sense the most important piece of Castañeda, says that you can actually bring research into the picture and try to improve programs, so that you might not expect to have something working at the beginning, but after a period of time you certainly expect improvement, right? And if the goal were bilingualism, and the research question was, what would be the characteristics of a good bilingual program and how can we implement it better, then we'd have a very different kind of approach towards knowledge building in this field. And we basically haven't had that since the early 1980s, when funding looking at the value of bilingualism was still part of the federal portfolio. So I guess what that means, and I'm sorry that is the somewhat depressing picture. I can tell you about the state of affairs because even today you look at No Child Left Behind, you look at the discussions around the reauthorization, there's very little of the B word around. You look at the Common Core standards, there's very little around bilingualism in there. Even advocates of 21st century skills. We talk about all of the wonderful high-level skills, don't talk about bilingualism as one of the skills, which is really quite disappointing. And we have smatterings of hope, certificate of the seal of biliteracy that the state has with the support of places like Californians Together. Is possibly promising, but it's not a rosy picture. However, I do think that there are pockets of leadership in some school districts, Dale being among them, who have an interest in and a value, and hopefully supported by their board members. And with community support in developing bilingualism, and if you can get that, and put research together with the districts and with those communities, then we can start building the right kind of science to underlie and support these values. So I'm sorry to have not the most positive of messages here, but I hope that it gives us sort of a basis, a comparison point from which, 15 years from now we'll look back and say, gee, at least we've made some progress. So I don't know if there's time for questions or comments, but
we have like about 2 or 3 minutes for really brief question or comment. Okay.
All right.
Yeah. Brief.
In Germany, they take bilingual education very seriously. They are concerned that their kids will not become bilingual because becoming bilingual into English is a must in Germany. Now the kids, the parents, even it's the equivalent of the New York Times in Germany. The question is, do they become bilingual into Spanish, Latin, because even middle-class Americans waking up to that reality of becoming bilingual into Spanish. For the English-speaking middle class, they will do that. And just a comment that bilingual education does work, but we have to develop the language, native language, development, because otherwise bilingual education and literacy programs will not work. That's not given.
Yes. And let me just add that one really should use this as an opportunity to build coalitions between not just across language lines, and think about it as a bilingualism across languages, with Spanish being, of course, the central pillar in California, but also across social class lines as well. Two-way programs, the few that exist, are trying to do some of that. We actually need much better research there in terms of how all of that is working in terms of parent participation, et cetera. But it's a real opportunity to build those kinds of bridges and coalitions.
Yeah, let's Dale and
There.
Just to support the notion of multilingualism at Patty's school, South Castro Middle School, we are going to expect the students to graduate. The languages are English, Spanish, and Mandarin. And then they're going to go to Belmont High School where they'll continue it. And then we're in the backfield, we'll have to do it the other way. They go to the elementary. But because we're doing secondary, when our kids are already coming with Spanish, which is predominant the group that's there. And then we're going to give them, strengthen the English, and then give them that third language. And I think that the notion that the Europeans can do it, so can we do it with our kids who are mostly immigrants at those particular schools. So what we want to do now is research it, so we reach out to all of you to help us with that.
You bet. You got it.
Time for one more. We were talking to me before your talk, and I think you've kind of answered this already, but why haven't we been able to bring bilingual education back to California? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, Ken.
Yeah, well, I think that is, why haven't we
been able to bring bilingual education back to California?
Yeah, I think there, I think, well, a couple of barriers. I mean, I think part of why bilingual education was on weak grounds was the implementation and our ability to, we didn't quite, in spite of all the efforts to train teachers, et cetera, just to get, some, kind of exceed the threshold level that you need for a program to be, to be considered high quality, and we just never got a handle on it. And then we lost the grip, and so now that it's kind of gone further downstream, and to create a bilingual teacher force now is extremely challenging. The other is that now that we have an English-only framework plus a whole standards accountability framework within it, plus we have successful cases of within those programs. That is, people have tried and mounted. I spent some time in Sanger, California, where it's been an English-only program. But they're really working hard, and they're showing quite a bit of success on the English assessments and so forth. So to the extent that you have successful cases like that, right, in a sense, they might give people a false sense of security that this is, oh, okay, so this place can do it, so why don't we? And so I think those, those could be some of I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't have these successful cases. Obviously, this is the case, but that, an example here doesn't make it a state-like policy.
I think we have to cut it now. Kenji's going to be around the
I'll be
rest
around.
of the day. Thank you so much for that. What you're going to hear for the rest of the day now is, I think, not a single down word. I think you're going to hear about benefits, and you're going to hear about programs that are doing this. And I don't think that we have to be happy with limited successes. I think that what we need to do now is move forward to the bigger successes around not just learning English, but as maybe following a European model where it's mother language +2, right? So what we're going to do, and I want to just say a couple words here, because I won't get a chance to do this later, about the people who will be moderating. Because not only do we have like really amazing panels, but we also have moderators on those panels who won't have as much of an opportunity to speak, but who will frame some of what you're going to hear. For the next panel, dealing with basically the benefits of building on language and culture, Concepcion Valadez is going to be, Concepcion is over there, is going to be moderating that panel. Concepcion has been at UCLA, I think, shepherding cohorts of students through bilingual instruction, through research in bilingual education for something like 35 years, Concepcion? Almost, almost. And so she has really been a pillar here at UCLA through good times and bad, in helping us to keep some focus in this area. And she will be moderating the next panel. After that, you will have the treat of Octavio Pescador, who I can't be in the same room with for more than 5 minutes without dissolving into laughter, because he just has a tremendous sense of humor. I don't know if he will display it as a moderator, but Octavio is a research associate with the Paulo Freire Institute here at UCLA. He got his BA in political science from UCLA and a master's in international development from Stanford, and came back to UCLA for his PhD. Done a lot of very interesting things. He is very much, he's a citizen of Mexico and a citizen of the US, and so he is very much a binational, I want to say person, but he's more than a person. He's a binational link for us and for Mexico, and I think more recently, he's become the star guest on CNN in Espanol. So for any of you who watch CNN in Espanol, you will see him on a regular basis commenting on just about anything you can imagine. So that's some of what's in store for you this afternoon. We need to move efficiently now. I think I've got it right. We need to move efficiently back to the California room to begin the next sessions. Thank you.